So let's create a Hello World cross-platform application using Visual Studio 2019 for Windows. So you probably get this box on the screen, and I'm going to create a new project. Under project type, choose mobile, and you should see mobile app Xamarin.Forms. If that's not there, you need to go back to the Visual Studio installer and make sure that that was an option you chose. Okay, so with that, we click Next and now give the application a name. So I'm going to say Hello Xamarin.Forms. As for the location, a little bit careful with this. I don't recommend you put this in the directory tree of any cloud service, such as OneDrive, simply because you're going to be generating a lot of files, and those files are going to be changing rapidly, and those engines are going to be trying to synchronize that in the background. As you can imagine, that isn't necessarily a good recipe. I have a folder where I keep all my GitHub projects, which is outside of any of those trees and has a short path as well, so maybe off your root drive. I've put it in there for now, and that's fine. Okay, and we click Create. Now we're going to use a blank template. Okay, there are various templates with Get You Started code. A new one is Shell, which is rather nice, but we're going to use some very basic stuff. We're going to just have a blank template, although it's not entirely blank. And the only two platforms we're targeting here are Android and iOS, not Windows. Okay, click that and we wait until that's built. Always with these things, they're also an exercise in patience sometimes, because first time you do things, it isn't necessarily very quick. And that includes running the Android emulator. So I already have mine running. Bear in mind that when you come to try this program out, it's going to take a little while for that to spin up. On that subject, you need to make sure you've got an Android emulator set up. If you want to use iOS, you're going to have access to a Mac on a network that you can reach and know its IP address, and there's a whole load of instructions on how to do that. It's quite good, but it's outside the scope of this video. So we're going to work on Windows, so Android is our sort of only sort of native option, and even then it's in a virtual machine. So we go to the Tools, Android Device Manager. We'll say yes to that, and we wait. Now I've got one I've set up already. If you haven't, click New. Base it on any device you like. That's going to set its features and its screen size, etc. It must be an x86. I'm using the latest version of Android, Pi 9, more specifically API 28, because within a single release version you can have different API versions. So remembering API 28. I'm not going to create that because I've already done it. Now, really good tip, learned from sort of experience here. If you're getting problems launching your application in the emulator, come back to this, right click and go factory reset. I've actually done that once to date already in order to get things to run. Mine is already running, but I could stop it. Right, so I tend to run it and leave it running because it's a little bit slow on my machine anyway to get it going. Right, so API 28. So why do I care about that? Well, let's go to the Solution Explorer, which on Windows is on the right hand side, unlike the Mac, where it's on the left. You can of course move it. And you see we've got 3 projects within our solution. So the solution is a sort of container for these projects. There are dependencies between these projects. But in essence, what you've got are 2 native platform specific projects. So there's the iOS one here. There's something called Xamarin.ios that lets you basically create a native iOS application, and it provides C# wrappers around all the Apple APIs. All right, same for Android, which is great if you know those APIs, if you know those frameworks well, but you want to write a load of code in C# and possibly share it. We're not doing that as such. Well, we are, but we're leveraging an additional set of libraries known as Xamarin.Forms, which is going to abstract out an awful lot of the common stuff that you would do and it would be almost identical on the two platforms. Although they won't necessarily look the same, they'll share most of the code here. So ultimately, there has to be a native iOS application. There has to be a native Android one. While we're looking at Android, right-click it, Properties, go to the manifest. The interesting thing is that the target Android version is, as I said, API 28. This basically defines the sort of APIs available. Bear in mind you can still use older ones. In this case, I'm going from 5, which is a API 21 onwards. You've got to be careful to not use API calls from 28 if you're running on 5. That isn't so much of an issue with Forms until you start adding some native code. Okay, so let's go. That one's set, so I'm happy with that. I'm not going to change anything. Yours might not be the same. And we've got the Forms project here. This is where we get most interested. But before we go piling in and trying to run it, a couple more things to think about. Again, this is a step which technically isn't necessary, but it's got me out of jail so many times. Right click the solution and go to, where are you? Manage NuGet packages for solution. NuGet is the package manager for .NET. So lots of nice toys in here. We do indeed have an update to Xamarin.Forms. I like to keep my Xamarin.Forms libraries up to date, so let's do that and accept. And then we wait. So this is project specific. Okay, this, you don't just do this once and then every project you create will have the same one. No. Right, okay. Now, these videos are informal. They're not high production quality, so you might even catch me taking a sip of tea or coffee in the background. Anyway, let's move on. So that's that done. No updates. The other source of pain, tools, Android SDK Manager. Again, we are looking to see if this update button appears down here. It doesn't. Looks like everything's set to Android 9, platform 28. Yeah. Everything looks good. The emulator is ticked by default. Good. So that looks like everything's bang up to date, ready to go. Right. So first thing, let's run it. And that will talk to my already running emulator here. And already we've got a problem. Okay. Something I should have done. Right click Android and set a startup project. Okay, so that kind of helps. And then just to be belt and braces, I'm going to go build clean because I've changed some settings and updated a few things. And I'm going to rebuild the solution. And hopefully that's going to resolve that problem. Okay, I'll pause my video so you don't have to wait. Okay, the code's built, and so now I'm going to run it. Now, again, make sure you've got the right device selected up here, and then you can just hit run. Now, it's not dreadfully quick on my machine. I've got quite a few things running at the same time, including the screen capture, which is aggravating it, I think. So I notice that when I'm on my Mac and I do the equivalent on the Android emulator, it seems to be quite snappy actually. Okay, so this is looking promising, and eventually, again, it'll be faster on a real device and probably on a different computer. We expect to see welcome to Xamarin.Forms. Okay, so little rotation. Are we supporting rotation? Maybe this one is portrait only app. Maybe rotation's turned off on the device. There we go. All automatic for you. So that's what it does. It just says welcome to Xamarin.Forms. We want to make it a bit more interesting than that. We want this to say hello world, and we'd like that to happen when we tap a button. Okay, so not quite sure why that's not rotating back, but I'm going to stop it. Right, don't know why that opened. As I said, these videos are fairly informal. I've learned my lesson over the years that you can put a lot of effort into these things. Everything changes the following year, and you end up re-recording them. So you get the kind of teaching style that I would use in the class. Only I watch my language a bit more carefully. All right. So, okay, let's look at this. So that's our Android app. We're not even going to look in the native stuff. Well, I said I lie. I'm going to look at one thing. Main-activity.cs. If you're an Android developer, you'll see that as something you recognize, the onCreate method. The bit I'm interested in is that here, right? It instantiates something of type or class app, right? And calls this load application. The equivalent in iOS would be your application delegate. I know because I write iOS native. And very similar load application, new app. All right. So the app class is our entry point if we're thinking about the cross-platform forms. So here it is, and you'll notice you get two files, not one. All right, there's the app.xaml.cs, that's C#, and the app.xaml when it wants to open, and a little previewer. That's nice, which you can turn off if you hit this. But let's look at the C# file first. So what have we got? We've got a class app, subclasses application. That's a Xamarin.Forms class. Interestingly, you've got this partial thing here, and I talk a bit about that on the in the notes. And here's the constructor, which will run when you instantiate it. That will call this very important initialize component. All right, and once that's done, it instantiates main page and sets it to the property main page, which of the same name by coincidence. That's a property on application or one of its parent classes. All right, so this is what's interesting, main page. Now, if you've done a bit of mobile development before, you'll know that somewhere, whether you're on iOS or you're on Android, you can get hooks into the life cycle, like when it launches, what to do when it sleeps, or when a phone call comes in, or when the app gets closed and backgrounded. All right, and some of those hooks are here in the cross-platform. So they've cleverly abstracted that out for you, so you don't have to write native code in all cases. Right, just something to note. But that's as much as we're interested in the app class for now. Only to note that main page is the first thing that the user sees, apart from a splash screen, and this is our starting point, the main page class. Okay, so let's focus on that a bit more than ignore that. Right, main page. Here we go. there's nothing to see, that's why. Main page.xaml.cs, C#, and its mate, the XAML file. Now that one should preview because that's drawable. We'll come back to that. So another little look. There's this namespace thing that keeps appearing. Namespace essentially is a prefix on everything within it. So it's actually class hello Xamarin.Forms.mainPage. All right. So you bring in the library, was also got a main page class, then you get a collision. Slap a namespace on the front of all your classes to avoid collisions. All right. If you don't know what namespaces are. Okay. We won't get into any more of the details of that. Let's look at what we got. So we saw that main page was instantiated. It's a subclass of content page, which has an important property called content, where all your view objects go. All right. And it also has a constructor which also calls initialize component. And you think, well, that's it. There's no mention of a label. There's no anything. And that's because it is only a partial class. This is only a bit of it. And you might be wondering, where's the rest of it gone? Well, that is discussed. I'm a low-level kind of guy, so I like to know how this stuff works under the hood. So I've gone into that a little bit. Excuse my squeaking chair, by the way. Right, so let's look at its mate. Now, main page.xaml. Oh, that looks familiar. Right, so here we go. We've got this content page. Remember, that's the same as the parent class here. There's a clue. All right. Whole load of XML attributes here, namespaces. Yummy, how nice. We'll skip on this for now. It's discussed in the documentation. So this is more important. Hello Xamarin.Forms.mainPage. That's the full unqualified name of this class, remember. All right. So this XML file has something to do with that class. So it's a bit like, when you first meet this, I mean, I didn't know this. I just guessed it, that they are somehow connected, and then you start reading tutorials and books and things, and it starts to unfold. All right. So we go straight into something called stack layout. Now, stack layout is certainly not a property of content page. What's not shown here is we could have written, content page dot content, and then put all that stuff between these two. But you don't need to, because it's a special type of default. I'll talk about that later. So anyway, we have a stack layout. That is an object that gets instantiated. Okay, and effectively it's a view that manages its subviews for you. The default is vertically, right? We can change the orientation if we wish. Orientation equals, you could have gone horizontally as well. And you see the layout just suddenly changed. We don't want that. We want vertical, so leave it as it is. And then we've got one child. So this actually has a property called children. Again, then that's not shown in here because it's the default. If you don't know, right, no explicit one. So we've got one label as a child, and it's got property text set to that, horizontal options centered, and vertical options center and expand, which is basically fill its allocated space as well as center. Right, we want a button. That's easy. So XAML, which is what this is called, which is perfectly formed XML, lets you create a user interface declaratively. All right, now you may find that a surprise. Where's the GUI editor? If you're an Apple person, where's Storyboard? It ain't there. You don't have any of it. Okay, so let's have a button, and I'm going to actually just make life simpler. I'm just going to go text equals click me. I'm sorry if this deviates slightly from the Mac version. I don't think it does. We'll just leave it like that for now. Oh no, sorry, let's tell it where to put it. Vertical options, I'll have center and expand. Notice IntelliSense works really nicely with XAML. Press / and you get that. Wow, look at that, straight away. Horizontal options we could tweak as well, but let's not make life more complicated than it already is. Okay, now if I run that, why not? Or run that, well, I'll tell you why not, take a while. Then we should see something very close to that in the simulator. So we've got two child objects, label and button. The button doesn't yet do anything, as we would find when we run the simulator. Just wait for that to deploy. I'll just pause the video. There we go, by magic. You'll see that if you click on this, you see the animation, but obviously nothing's changed yet because we don't have an event handler. Okay, so I just stop that one. So you can't just double click this and generate an event handler. It doesn't work like that, not here anyway. But we do know the event handler is called clicked, and if we press tab, it will create one for us. Clicked equals button clicked. Now look where it puts it. Let's just save that. There he goes. It's already done. So it does sort of do what, say, Visual Basic used to do. Okay, so now we've got a event handler, but I need to now access the label. Where is it? Well, there's nothing here about the label, and there still won't be. So we need a way to reference it, and you do that with a little namespace prefix, because obviously the word name is going to be quite popular, and it's x colon name, and we'll give it a name, message label. All right, now as soon as I save that, if I go back into here, you won't see anything yet, but if I type MESS, there it is. Dot text equals. So some magic has gone on under the hood. Hello world. Of course. Hello world. And now just to prove it, I'm going to run that. Now my machine's very, very loaded, so again I'll pause the video until it's done it. There we go, that didn't take too long, and I'm going to click this and it changes to hello world. Alright, and you can, and you're encouraged to, have a look and experiment with this, see what other options you might have, like for example font size. We make it large for the label, and that's a bit bigger now. Okay, and so forth. So that's interesting. Just by giving this thing a name, with this X colon name. X is this namespace here. If you know what a namespace is, it's a prefix basically. Forms knows about that prefix and will somehow magically make this message label available, even though it's not. But remember, this is a partial class. So in the next video, I'll show you where it's hidden. Okay, leave it there.